Segment 2, the Falklands. April 1982. You're a young journalist, so you will remember all of this vividly. Argentina invades and occupies the Falklands. I happened to be in Britain myself at the time, and it was a complete shock. The first question was, why would they care? Why would anybody want these Falklands? That's what I remember people saying to each other. Describe to us Prime Minister Thatcher's response.
Well, the invasion of the Falklands was, among other things, completely unexpected, except by a very few people. And so the British government didn't actually know that it was going to be invaded by Argentina until a day before the event took place. And therefore, obviously, there were virtually no preparations. And here we are, we have...
By the way, I should say, the Falkland Islands are in the South Atlantic, about 250 miles from the coast of Argentina, and about 6,000 miles.
It's more, I think,
More than 6,000 or more miles from the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Right, go ahead.
The Falkland Islands are a British colony, were and are a British colony, but a colony, unlike many, where everybody in it wanted to be. They were all of British descent, and they wished to continue to be with Britain. And so the question here is an act of military aggression. What do you do about it? And basically, Mrs. Thatcher understood that if you didn't respond, the government would fall, because the indignation was total by British public opinion. And the Marines that we had a very small garrison out there. They were captured. So complete humiliation. And so the question is, what do you do? And Mrs. Thatcher didn't know what to do, in the sense that there were no preparations for this. The logistics are terrible. The politics are unprecedented.
If I recall, you may correct me on this, but as I recall, there's an especially vivid scene in her autobiography in which she's being briefed on all of this. And John Knott, who's the Minister for Defense, who has earlier that day rounded up the admirals and said, what's going to be what can we do? And presented to Mrs. Thatcher the view of the Defense Ministry that essentially the Falklands were lost. And there was one man, but fill in this, tell the rest of this story.
This is essentially correct. By chance, almost all the main people who were supposed to help with these decisions were out of the country that day. And that turned out to be a good thing, because Mrs. Thatcher was sitting in the House of Commons having a sort of long-running meeting, trying to work out what they could do, drafting a letter to President Reagan asking for advice and assistance and so on. One admiral, the First Sea Lord, was in town, and he'd just been inspecting naval positions, so he was wearing his uniform. And he heard this meeting was going on. He wasn't asked to it. And he came bursting into it in the House of Commons. He had to
Leach, was it not?
Leach, he was called, Henry Leach. And he sort of found his way through. And Mrs. Thatcher was very, very pleased to see him, because she always respects the armed services. And she didn't know, what to think about all of this from a military point of view. And so everyone was very gloomy, including John Knott, the Defence Secretary, who you mentioned. And she said, well, First Sea Lord, what could we do? And he said, well, Prime Minister, we could send a task force. And she said, because she had very little military experience at this point early, she said, what's a task force? So he said, he explained. And she said, how long would it take to get ready? And he said, 3 days. And she said, how long would it take to get to the Falklands? And he said, 3 weeks. And she said, you mean 3 days, don't you? And he said, no, 3 weeks, 3 weeks. She had no idea of the geographical.
Right.
And she said, can we do it? Can we reconquer the islands? And he said, yes, Prime Minister, we can. And though it's not for me to say, I think we must. And so she got interested. And she said, why? Why do you say that? And he said, because if we don't do it, we will be a country whose word counts for nothing in the world. And of course, then she was really on her mettle. And suddenly she'd been given the sense that it was possible, because no matter what her ambitions, if she's advised by everybody that it's not physically possible, she has to give up. But it's possible. So she said, right, well, let's make ready the task force. And the Cabinet agreed to that on the Friday night. Big debate on the House of Commons on the Saturday night, which she survived, though with some difficulty. And the task force set sail on Monday. And once it's in the sea, on the way, or on the sea, I should say, very hard to turn it back. And what Mrs. Thatcher then had to to manage was an incredibly difficult diplomatic situation when you're trying to see if you could get a non-military solution without conceding the crucial points, and which she had to hold off people who wanted to appease Argentina.
And everyone, as I recall, I say everyone, The Economist, the Financial Times, the whole diplomatic corps, I mentioned that these small islands were much closer to Argentina than to thousands of miles from Britain, only a few hundred miles from Argentina. The population was a few thousand.
Yes,
many
15,
thousands more than that of sheep.
Yep.
But the population was only a few thousand, so the notion that you cut a deal was overwhelming.
It was overwhelming in the minds of diplomats, but in the opposite feeling in the minds of the British people. Because
so she had the people with her more or less from the get-go.
Yes. But of course, it could have died because of sheer military failure apart from anything else. So the loneliness of her position in this and the difficulty of trying to work out what to do and the
and Leach was not representative, really. It was almost by a kind of a sweet miracle that the one man who had mettle happened to find his way into the meeting at that moment.
That's right. I mean, to be fair to the others, they did have mettle, but they were just very, very aware of the difficulty. It was a very, very serious logistical, strategic difficulty. And, how would you land on the islands? Terrible weather, no cover, so you get attacked by a very effective Argentine Air Force and so on. However, Mrs. Thatcher saw that you had to do this unless you could get a peace with honour, and Argentina was so stupid that it didn't offer that. And she had a lot of toing and fro with the United States, often very tense.
Yes.
It wasn't always very easy with Secretary Haig. President Reagan slightly hedging his bets because there was a genuine, very understandable US fear of resurgent communism in South America. But in the end, the strength of our alliance with the United States and her personal friendship with President Reagan meant that they came down on the British side. So we had all the logistical and sort of diplomatic backup we needed. And then it was a wonderful military achievement. And the British forces distinguished themselves and they won. And with a relatively small loss of life and virtually I think 2 or 3 civilians died in the whole conflict.
I believe there were 2 or 3 civilians on the Belgrano. The Argentines lose the Belgrano, the British lose the Sheffield. In other words, 2 ships went down, 907 killed, 74 days of conflict, but Britain wins.
News, and it's Great Britain. Marvellous forces, every single one of them. It's just been everyone together, and that's what matters. We knew what we had to do. We knew what we had to do. And we went about it.
To me, what's so striking about that is that you can hear the crowd singing Rule Britannia in the background just off Downing Street.
Which, of course, now they wouldn't be allowed to do because of security, apart from anything else. So the crowd are all